that are interested in reading a little bit more, or hearing a little bit more.
That's fine.
Okay.
I usually recommend that to your team when I'm talking to them, because short questions sometimes get long answers from me.
It's working. It's thinking about recording it. There. Okay. Okay, so 16 years you've served nearly, and thinking about going for one more. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about that, and particularly given your opponent in this race as a newcomer. You could make the argument for a fresh pair of eyes. So I'd like to hear your take on what experience brings to the table, and kind of how your approach to this as a veteran might be different.
Well, I was kind of lucky when I was first elected, having spent 31 years in the employment of the city of Dubuque at the fire department. And my last decade there was in a command staff position where I interacted with City Hall and with other departments, and occasionally with the council on a much more regular basis. So I had a fair amount of background on what the whole organization did and how it works. And that's one of the biggest things that I continue to bring to the table is knowledge of process, how to get from point A to point B. And it can be a tricky path in city government. My experience isn't just experience; it's also a pretty lengthy list of accomplishment. So that's probably the major difference. My opponent's a bright young lady, and I have no doubt she's going to go places in government in the future. I'm just hoping it's not now.
Go ahead and talk a little bit about some of those accomplishments of which you're most proud.
Well, one of the very first real meaningful vote that I was involved with right after I was elected 16 years ago was an expansion of human rights to include the LGBTQ community. Human Rights Commission had recommended for almost a decade that the council make that change to ordinance. They declined to do it for various, I thought, not good reasons. It was probably the biggest issue that separated me from the incumbent opponent that I ran against in 2005. And one of the very first votes after the new council was seated in January of 2006, and I'm very proud to say that the newly seated council passed it on first reading that first night. That was significant, and that kind of set the tone. The new mayor brought to the table at that time sustainability as a potential branding for the city, as a place that we ought to be, as we ought to try and begin to be truly green and start to think about generations to follow and how the planet's going to work for them and how the city is going to work for them. And we managed to incorporate equity and fiscal responsibility along with the green programs and the triad approach that city government has taken and adhered to all these years. That's a pretty big deal. We don't just look at something for its pure sustainability value. It has to be fiscally workable, and it has to not be harmful to any of the humans that we're working with. So that's a challenge, and one that we've met pretty well. We've grown and expanded the dual transit system. It's nowhere near where it needs to be for a modern city, but compared to where it was, it's in pretty tremendous shape. And each of those steps are kind of expensive steps. So they almost have to be incremental to not to live up to our fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers and keep living here affordable. My goal when I worked at the fire department was to deliver emergency services that were worth the penny paid for it, that people would feel a sense of success when they paid their tax bill, that they'd feel like they had bought something worth buying. And I bring that to the table every day. I look at all issues that come to the council with the question in the back of my mind: if we do this, will anybody be better off at the end of the day? And if we can prove to ourselves that that's going to be the case, then that's a pretty good direction to go usually.
A fire truck pulled up right outside my window as you're speaking.
I had
So I
nothing
don't
to do
know
with
how you
that.
pulled that off.
Had nothing to do with that. We had the congressional staff here a few years ago, and we took them up to Eagle Point Park, talking about transportation issues and the need for repair of the lock and dam. And three eagles started playing right above us, like 10 feet above us, circling and looking around. And we were getting back on the bus, and Mayor Buell looked at them. Thanks, guys. That's all we need. We didn't do that either.
Sorry to interrupt you there. So
It's
any
okay. I can
other
take it.
accomplishments you wanna mention?
Well, we had the other hot issue when I came on board was a lot of people in the North End talking about their disdain for the idea of the big ditch through their neighborhood, tearing down houses and building a sewer where everybody can see it. And as that conversation engaged the people and allowed them to craft the design and to craft how the thing looks, it went from the big ditch to the beautiful linear park and water conveyance. That's now the B branch. And it's pretty easy to sit back and say, boy, I'm glad we're done with that. That was a big one. But there's no such thing as done. Just about the time half the people thought we were done, the library came along and says, what if we had a story trail? What if we put up a panel here with the first page of a children's book, and then you walked over here and you read the next panel? That happened. That's pretty neat. It's a small thing, but it's a neat thing. And you're going to see a lot more things like that along that parkway. So that's a big deal. Our wastewater plant was a huge investment, and we could have spent less money and kept status quo and continued to burn the solid residue from after centrifuging the waste. But we didn't. We looked at the science, and we looked at anaerobic digestion as a better process, as a better environmental process, and as a process that had some collateral benefits. Like right now, today, there's methane being pulled out of the waste that comes down the sewer pipe, processed on site, and injected into the Black Hills pipelines, fueling our homes and businesses. That's kind of a big deal. We're turning turbines down there that create a great deal of the electricity that operates the plant, run also from the sewer methane. And lastly, they heated most of the building by piping the effluent around and using the geothermal heating and cooling capability of that liquid material. You don't want leaks, but it's a pretty innovative approach, and it's a pretty innovative plant. So that was probably my first really big ticket that I had to think, wow, this is one of those moments where we're going to be paying for this for a while, but we're going to be benefiting from it for a much longer while. And that too is not done. We have what we didn't do at that time was deal with the nutrients. They're not really nutrients when they're in water, but they're nutrients when they're applied to lawns and gardens and farm fields. So, and the reason we didn't do it then was the standard wasn't yet written, and you didn't want to spend millions of dollars to build something that didn't quite reach the goalpost. So we need to still address the nutrients that are in the wastewater, get the phosphates and the nitrites out of it, and keep that moving down the pipe. But I'm proud to say, and I can look anybody in the eye and say that the discharge water coming from our wastewater plant is much cleaner than the river water flowing past the pipe. And that's kind of a big deal. You don't want to go drink it, I don't think, but but you sure don't want to drink the stuff coming down the river either. So those are big deals. We passed the fire department staffing plan some years ago in preparation for a potential seventh station. That got put on hold with COVID. I think the city manager wisely decided that he needed to freeze those fire positions as well as other positions, because you can't hire employees when you're not certain that you're going to be able to pay their salaries. And that's exactly where we were 18 months ago. We came through COVID pretty marvelously. We've been restoring our reserves, which remain untouched. So we're well above the recommended level from our bonding consultants and others in reserves, and we managed to manage to the bottom line by freezing positions, keeping positions open, and not having to incur those expenses. And as we discovered that we were going to be okay, that the inflow was not as badly interrupted as we were afraid that it was, the city manager has started to rehire some of those positions and unfreeze them and get them filled up. Have learned recently that the fire department is working a ton of overtime, including some mandatory overtime. And that was never the case when I was there 16 years ago. You were lucky if you got a couple of days of overtime in a year, and it was a big deal when it was your turn for overtime because it was a nice chunk of additional money, but it's wearing them out. Talked to a number of firefighters recently, and they're kind of beat up by working so much, and their call volume is way up. So we need to get back on track with getting those additional bodies to them so that they can have some relief, so that their days off matter and are actually days off to rehab and rethink. We're also struggling with police keeping bodies on the street. Similar problem. Call volume is way up. Other interesting piece with the calls is they take longer. It's not just more of them. It's making sure that you've got your gloves and gowns if necessary, if you're going to be exposed to someone with respiratory symptoms, that you're properly masked, and then the decon and rehab of the units before you can go on the next call also takes longer, mostly because of COVID. So that's changed. But police are required to spend several weeks on our dime at the academy. So it takes a long time to fill a position, and we only get a few academy slots a year, and they come up at odd schedules. So hiring is difficult. Timing of hiring is difficult. And even though we've increased the authorized strength of the police department, which is a great accomplishment that I'm very proud of, the logistics of doing that are really, really terrible. That and the applicant pool is down, as it seems to be everywhere for everything right now. These public safety jobs have enormous exposure to COVID and other infectious diseases. And I think the potential candidates I think that's weighing pretty heavily on them if they really want to do that these days. So we're trying to think of ways to make it more attractive and more palatable, and some success, but not as much as we need.
Are there things looking back that you would do differently, maybe cast a vote a different way, or with the benefit of hindsight that maybe didn't work out the way that you anticipated?
You know, I get asked that question every now and then, and the only one I'm disappointed in myself, it goes back about 10 years, is the council chickened out on the first time during my service anyhow, that we had the opportunity to finally get some sidewalks down Kennedy Road. Had a contentious public hearing. We had a lot of people angry at the idea of having to do that thing that just about every other property owner in the city has had to do at one point or another, or the property owner that they bought the property from had to do. And the need was there the whole time. It's a public safety need. It's there is probably an equal but less loud group of citizens that can't imagine why there aren't sidewalks there. And we bowed to the political pressure that night. And I've regretted that ever since. Now we're back in that conversation. I think we'll get it done this time. We're able to apply for and get some federal funds to help under the Safe Routes to School granting from DOT. So that the economic impact will be less on the folks along Kennedy. But we're going to have some tough public hearings, and we're going to have some people angry at us no matter how it comes out. Those kinds of things are the hardest work on city council, when you've got a room full of people that half of them are going to go home disappointed, no matter what you decide. Just matters which half. And that's when it's time to start asking yourself that who's going to be better off at the end of the day question, and see if you can reconcile that. But that's truly the only one. We've stuck our neck out on some things, and they've worked. Every time we buy industrial land, that's a reach. But if you drive through Dubuque Industrial Center West and see all those buildings and all the jobs that are attached to them, you feel pretty good about that risk. When we borrowed money at very, very low, 1.5–2% interest to do big projects like the wastewater plant and a good chunk of the B branch, huge risk. But the debt's coming down. The debt's coming down fairly remarkably because we've decided that we didn't want to carry that level of debt, and we had some public pressure to reduce it. But it was absolutely the right thing to do and the right time to do it. The costs of construction were escalating at a much greater rate than the cost of borrowing. And so the the bottom line was that we saved millions and millions of dollars by borrowing money instead of trying to bank money and save money and do the projects later.
Rick, speaking of decisions that have been made in the past that some people are encouraging to revisit, downtown parking and the parking ramp for the agreement with Heartland and Cottingham and Butler is one, and the agreement was made before COVID, and then there's been some changes with work styles and since COVID, and so. Question for you would be: should the city revisit that agreement, and if so, in what way? Should it try to renegotiate, or what? Or just leave it as is? What are your thoughts?
Well, I have no doubt that the parking facility needs to occur. The timeline is the only thing that's in question, and that conversation is being revisited. And there's this also involves an agreement with Dupaco for the hundreds of people they've brought into the Millwork District. So we've got 500 or 600 people working fairly close to the location of this proposed new ramp that weren't there last year or the year before. And you're right that a number of them aren't back in the physical workplace yet. And I'm not sure which model prevails. I think that businesses are discovering that it's easier to do business when their employees are across the hall than across town. But we're also hearing from a lot of businesses that people are getting dressed and coming into work and they're spending all day on Zoom meetings with other people that they could have done from their home offices pretty easily. And I'm aware of at least one company in Dubuque that's given up their lease space because everything was going pretty great for them with their employees, with their workforce working from home. So those questions all linger. But the other thing that lingers is we've got at least two really big undeveloped buildings in the Millwork District that we'll see development if the excitement lingers in the district. And I think the excitement and the buzz is continuing to grow as additional businesses and eateries and things turn up down there. But I don't think those other buildings will develop unless there's ample parking close by. So it's an investment in that as well. How we got success in the developed buildings down along Washington and Jackson Street was we got in there first. We got the underground infrastructure all updated, all the utilities updated, got the streetscapes updated and looking nice, and that enabled the private investors to leverage other private money and grants to get their act together to rehab those buildings. And I think this is an important first step in leveraging those additional structures to come together. Now, the other legitimate question is, do we do it this year? Well, we've got the property acquisition squared away. That was probably the most critical piece. And there is, in fact, additional conversation going on with Dupaco, Heartland, and Cottingham and Butler on whether we can relax the timeline. They did grant us an additional year, a year and a half ago, because they didn't have employees working physically in their facilities. And we'll have that conversation, see what their needs are. But I certainly respect the fact that we spent years talking about this. We had funds budgeted in the 10-year plan to do a parking facility generally in the Millwork area. And what we did was we bumped that up about 3 years in the plan because of this development with the Roshek building. The other piece of history that's important is not too long ago, we were really concerned about what's going to happen to the Roshek building. It was running out of tenants. This is pre-IBM. The building was in modestly poor shape, and it was enormous. And it's right smack in the middle of downtown. What if that ends up an empty eyesore for the next many decades? What could happen to it? And the IBM opportunity came along. The ability to redevelop the building came along with the help of Dubuque initiatives, and we got that building into very good shape and very attractive shape. Now, the IBM thing did not land as solidly or as nicely as everybody would have liked it to, but Dubuque initiatives managed to sell the building and recover all of their investment and more. We've got a fully occupied big building in the heart of downtown Dubuque that now looks pretty great, and a lot of buzz down there. not too long ago, if you walked down that pedestrian mall, you were pretty lonely. Now, if you walk down what's become Main Street, there's a lot of buzz, a lot going on. So we have to not forget that these puzzle pieces all interlock, and not necessarily always good, but I know when you're tugging the tablecloth a little bit, salt shaker way over there might fall over that you weren't paying attention to. But I think we're doing the right thing by advancing this parking facility. I'm sorry for the long answer to a pretty simple question, but there's a lot of pieces, and the conversation is almost half a decade old. And what do we do and where do we do it? So we've got a fair amount of that solved.
Do you have any concerns about the aesthetics of the number of parking ramps in the downtown area in Dubuque compared to other cities you might travel to? Do you think it seems like we're parking heavy?
I don't think so. They don't stand out to me. The newer ones, I think, are nice looking structures. Some of the older ones, I don't think the Iowa Street parking ramp ever was an attractive structure by anybody's imagination. But it's a functional structure. The one right across from you guys, I think it's a pretty attractive building, but it does look like a parking facility. It doesn't look like an office. And I don't know what this one's going to look like. There's a lot of, there's no final design on it, but there's a lot of desire to have ground floor retail and office space and upper floor parking. Whether that'll come to fruition or not, we're nowhere near close to those decisions that will allow that to happen or not happen. But it's kind of an exciting concept. Excuse me. We've also had some informal conversation with a couple of the Dubuque County supervisors, and they'd like to participate in the project perhaps and get rid of the parking that's on the east side of the courthouse and make that into a green square. I think that'd be a big win if we can make that happen, to gain some green park space in downtown Dubuque, and would certainly enhance the attractiveness of the beautiful, beautiful courthouse for generations to come. So very preliminary conversations there, but I think that can happen. I think that's their desire, and I don't want to speak for them. But the folks I talked to are pretty excited about the possibility. So maybe that'll happen too. I kind of hope it does, because I think that'd really add some spark to the area.
So staying on the theme of things going on in downtown Dubuque, obviously a big thing that is coming up for discussion or further discussion and a potential vote is the Five Flags Center.
Sure.
Curious to your thoughts on what should happen with the Five Flags, what the city's involvement should be, and the whole concept of the referendum.
Okay, well, I think that part of the city's involvement is going to be to provide an entertainment facility. We provide parks that don't have a return on investment other than the enjoyment of the citizenry. And quite appropriately, the management of Five Flags is under the Leisure Services Department for that same reason. I was around when Five Flags was conceived of. I remember Mayor Brady building a scale model of it and bringing it just about everywhere you could bring a scale model, trying to sell the idea in the 70s. I remember working some arson fires in the theater after all the surrounding buildings were torn down early in my career in the fire department. I remember that big empty lot sitting there for a long time. But the biggest thing was Five Flags wasn't an idea that a city council came up with. Five Flags was a demand that the citizens came up with. We want a facility. We want to save this theater. We want a bigger place that we could have bigger events in. And that's how that concept was born. And they built what could be afforded at the time. Now we were ready to go to referendum a year and a half ago with what I thought was a pretty good plan. And our job's not, as council members, is not to endorse the go vote yes or to say go vote no for that matter. Our job is to say, here's the design that's been proposed. Here's the cost of that design, and take it to the voters by referendum. Say, do you want us to do it? So we've got to answer the what and the how much. And then if the voters say yes, then we have to figure out how to build it for that amount of money in that amount of space. Now, I don't know what the result would be. I know that it went from something feasible to something totally infeasible when COVID hit. But now that we're crawling our way back from COVID, I'm frankly not sure if a referendum will pass. I think it would be a neat thing. This is Rick talking, not the city council talking, but I enjoy going to shows down there. I understand that a lot of the businesses that exist in Lower Main and all around surrounding Five Flags wouldn't be there but for Five Flags. When the hotel was first built as a Clarion across the street from Five Flags, that location was attracted to them because of the Civic Center, because of the events going on there. If you talk to any of the food and beverage businesses downtown, their weeks get made if there's an event at Five Flags or two or not. So it came because citizens wanted it. This conversation came because citizens wanted us to have it. Now, some folks are very much against it. They think that, I keep hearing the word deficit. Well, the airport costs money, it runs at a deficit. The fire department costs money, it runs at a deficit. The parks cost money, they run at a deficit. So I don't look at it with that word, I look at it as investment. So is it a good investment for Dubuque? Maybe not at the level of cost that it might take, but letting it crumble and fall in on itself is certainly not an option. In fact, we have in our budget right now the funds to do the deferred maintenance that had been put off awaiting a decision on the referendum a couple of years ago, because stewardship of what we've got is very important to us. But I don't buy the argument that I hear from some folks that it's lost money all these years, we should just get rid of it. If it was a profit-making type of thing, somebody would have come along and said, hey, we'll buy it. We'll run it. We'll make money out of it. And no such offer has ever been advanced, nor will one, because it's something that cities do, is find amenities to make citizens happy and to give them entertainment. Now, I've said in all of my campaigns that if you had an executive position at the newspaper to fill, you could put together a package. You can compete with other papers and communities this size and bigger, and you can make an attractive employment offer. But how do you close the deal? Well, if the person comes in and sees a nice looking airport and the peonies are blooming in Grandview and the symphony can play and the schools can teach, that closes the deal. Is it going to be a good place to live? Is it going to be a place where I want to be? And it worked on the six of you. You're all here. And we're hoping that it works on other people. And the tentacles of that thought process stretch out to a lot of things. It's controversial whether we should be involved in the Viking boat dock deal. That's evolving into the Viking plus other companies' boat dock deals, perhaps. I don't know how to measure this. I know that when the America or the Queen of the Mississippi or the American Queen or any of the 6 or 8 boats are now operating in the upper Mississippi River without Viking even in the water yet, pull up here, a lot of money gets off those boats and some of it stays here. I don't know how many of those people say, that was really a neat town, let's get in the car and go back there next year. I know some of them do. And I know that there's some value in that, but I don't know how we put a meter on that to understand how much it's. Same thing with the transient boat docks. People come in there and have a good experience. I know they come back. I don't know how many of them or how often, but I know for sure it happens. And that's part of what that kind of investment does. So half-assed answer again for Five Flags. I'm personally going to vote for the yes in the referendum when it happens. I'm not going to tell people that that's what they should do, because that's not the city council's role.
Thank you, Rick.
Little off topic, and maybe not as much of a hot button issue, but you mentioned earlier that you are interested in expanding Jewel operations. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I haven't really heard a whole lot of people talk about that recently.
Well, we've got a lot of new employment opportunities on the western edge of Dubuque. We've got a lot of education opportunities. Unfortunately, due to what I believe was a legislative error in the 60s at NICC and Piasta. And some of these places are pretty far away from where potential workers are. And we've got some routes that can get them to work, but if they're working second shift or something, they're kind of on their own. We don't have bus routes to get people to and from employment opportunities in a lot of cases. Most of the buses run on an hourly schedule. That's too long. It's better than not being there by far. But an hour is a long time to wait at a bus stop. If you're dependent on a bus ride to go to the grocery store, for instance, you might be transferring buses twice to get there. So you might have an hour or so invested in getting there. You get your groceries and you're sitting there with several full bags of groceries waiting for a bus for maybe another hour because you didn't get out of there quite in time for the one that was scheduled. And then you've got this long 2-bus trip to get back home. You got half a day in going to the grocery store if you're transit dependent. We've got to do better than that. And unfortunately, doing better costs a lot of money. And it's another area where we're having difficulty staffing the positions that are there. Not as much as some places are, but it's still a bit of a challenge. I drive a school bus for Dubuque Community Schools. That we're really struggling for people to come and drive school buses. And as a retired guy, with it being kind of a hobby job, it's a great gig. I got half my day in 2-3 hours ago. Go back this afternoon for another hour and a half, 2 hours, and I'll be done. And they pay me some pretty decent money for a part-time, no benefit job. Good equipment, good bosses, not working real hard. Anyhow, dual expansion needs to happen. It's going to be an incremental fix here and a fix there. We've got to find a way to get people to and from Piasta so that we can skill up our workforce. And while we're talking about workforce, we have figured out that a big barrier to having a thriving big workforce is childcare. We don't find a way to get people into affordable childcare. I don't have any idea what the numbers are of single mothers who are trapped in their homes because they got children to deal with that can't possibly think about going back to work. And these are skillful, smart people. They're figuring out how the most complicated problem on earth, getting children raised. And we could sure use them in the workforce 8 hours a day, or even 6 or 3 or 4. But we can't possibly get them there under the circumstances that they're facing right now. A lot of that is state government issues, things like the fiscal cliff that you fall off of if suddenly you earn $1 too much and your health care is taken away, things like that. But we've identified a lot of those things and we're starting to work on them, and we're bound and determined on the city council right now to make a serious dent in poverty. We've got a big poverty reduction plan that's waiting for an action. We've got Anderson Sancy in the position now, and he'll have purchase authority start doing some things in July. Hopefully, we'll start coming up with some very real things that work. And we're already partnering with not-for-profits that are having some success. We're invested in the Dream Center and Fountain of Youth, for instance. Fountain of Youth specifically is focused on interrupting generational poverty, and the Dream Center is catching kids up to reading. And we've learned that 3rd grade is kind of a demarcation point where students stop learning to read and start reading to learn, and we're catching them up. One student at a time, 20, 30 students at a time with the Dream Center. Huge need in the community. So we got to find the things that work and do those, and figure out what's not working and stop doing them. And we got to get people to where they need to be to do any of it. So that's part of how that all fits together.
I'm going to jump in here, Rick. So wanted to ask you a little bit about the city manager and kind of the workforce culture among city employees. We've had some high-profile lawsuits. Obviously, there was a push not too long ago to fire the city manager, and a lot of the underlying issues cited related to kind of things going on with employees and some of that culture. I'm curious what your take is on that. How is the city manager doing, but also what is kind of that workforce culture like? What's kind of the sentiments of city employees? Are we seeing any movement in that way?
I have to be very careful with words because of the litigation that has just been settled, and some caveats that came with that. I'll tell you that prior to the conversation that was widely reported in the paper, the city manager and his staff was already working on revamping all of the HR policies in the organization. And we've got a fairly new, about 2.5 years in, HR manager in Shelley Stickforth, and that task has been completed, and we've got a much smoother running ship and a lot more opportunities for employees that are having difficulties to communicate them to staff and try and address them. I think that the biggest measure of the success of a workforce is how long they stay. And by and large, people come to work for the city of Dubuque and 20, 30, 40 years later retire from the city of Dubuque. I still get the weekly newsletter that comes out with paychecks, and you look at anniversary dates of employment. And man, we got people with 30, 40 years still coming to work, still wearing a smile most of the days. Now, these folks work hard. City halls have been really working hard since the pandemic. The hours working from home, the hours working in the office, the stresses of making sure you got the masks on all the time, for police and fire, the call volume, all of that is really challenging, and it's absolutely a different place than it was 30 years ago. It was pretty challenging over the many years to bring females, minorities into the public safety workspaces, especially because they'd been so male dominated, so white male dominated for so many years. And that's certainly not just a Dubuque problem. That's a national problem at least. We've had very little growing pain with all of that. And a number of people successfully completing careers from those protected class groups. So I'm pretty comfortable that our house is in order, that the right things are happening. I know we've got employees that are stressed. And I know that even before the pandemic, we were looking at some labor shortages and at some unfilled positions and some people working a job and a half or two jobs and getting the job done nonetheless. But I also know that these folks are committed to the citizens and to getting the job done somehow, some way. And a lot of us, take on some personal pain because of that commitment to get it done, despite all odds sometimes.
So Rick, at the very beginning, Amy had mentioned, your 16 years of experience versus your opponent's fresh set of eyes, if you will. Other than that, 16 years of experience, talk about what you see as the major factors that differentiate you from your opponent.
Well, the primary election, thousands of votes differentiated us. This is a different kind of race. I've been in a couple of races where the opponent was coming to destroy and break things, and this certainly isn't the case. This is an opponent with some pretty positive thoughts about city government, with some pretty positive ideas about city government, and she certainly has to be taken seriously. What I've got to sell isn't just 16 years of experience. It's a lifetime of accomplishment, and I'm pretty proud of that. And I'm sure that I'm sure that I will do a better job at accomplishing things in the next 4 years than anybody else I could imagine stepping into the position. I'm also sure that I'm getting older, and I'm not looking at doing many more terms. Probably not any more terms after this one, but life can change on you. We'll see where we're at in 3 or 4 years. But for right now, I'm very comfortable in the skin I'm in and the job I'm doing. I'm very, very comfortable with the new eyes that I sit among on the city council, who are just awesome to a T, every single one of them. Excited about new leadership at the helm, although I've been an avid supporter of Mayor Buell for all the years he's been in that position. I'm excited to see whoever takes the mayor's chair to work with him. I guess we have to say him now. We know that'll likely be true. And I think we're looking at a future that's brighter than a lot of places. It's not coincidental that Dubuque has won all these awards that keep happening and happening and happening. It's because of hard work and good vision, and it's not just because of the city council. It's because of Greater Dubuque Development. It's because of the Telegraph Herald. It's because of Radio Dubuque. It's because of Cottingham and Butler. It's because of a long, long list of people that are digging in and making the place better, telling the story, and shaking down the money. It's a better place because we're lucky enough to have people like Terry Goodman come to work for us with her incredible list of contacts and her ability to make the case for dollars for projects at various levels of government and among the private sector. It's people keep talking about what's the secret sauce. Well, the secret sauce is that people like what we're doing. Excuse me. We just completed the visioning process that developed the new comprehensive plan, and we had over 6,000 unique citizen inputs into that thing. That's a reach, and we've had people talking during this campaign and others about we've got increased citizen involvement. Man, you got to go beg for it sometimes. We had to go beg for it to get those 6,000, but we did it and we got it. It's we have public hearings on large important issues, and we don't get big crowds sometimes, unless it's right in your neighborhood. Then you get a crowd. The other point that the other thing we're working towards, in fact, we've done the work. We're just excuse me, waiting on the technology. COVID made us better at one thing. I sat in this chair doing city council meetings for almost a year, and we learned that we could do it remotely. We could make it happen. We could make it work. It's not the same as being in the room, but it was better than nothing, and nothing was probably what we're going to have otherwise. Excuse me. But it worked so well that we've purchased the technology now to make the council chambers truly interactive, so that so John could sit in his office and interact with the council meeting if he needed to or wanted to, and produce a good news story by midnight for you to print the next morning. It's going to be at the point where citizens can sit home and can interact in a public hearing without having to get dressed and go down to City Hall or down to the council chambers and stand in line to state their opinion. We're going to be able to have two-way video interactivity with citizens where they're at, and that's a huge step. And that was something we probably wouldn't have considered, but for COVID coming and teaching us that it could work and that it should work, and we took the lesson seriously. Now, equipment's bought, funds are available, but equipment's not available. We're kind of stuck in the chip shortage that everybody else is stuck in for everything else that they want. And I'm not sure it's just about chips anymore. It's chips and ships and containers and trucks and long list of things. Hopefully the globe will figure out that this supply chain, the just-in-time delivery model isn't really the best for everybody all the time. It certainly hasn't been for the last year. We have a sister city in Handan, China, and we got a communication from them in December or January of 19 saying, hey, we've got this thing and we need protective equipment and we can't find it. Can you guys make some phone calls and see if you can buy it? Money's not an object. We'll pay for it. And we got some of our healthcare partners looking around and found out we learned early we can't buy it either. And the stuff was mostly made in China. And here's the Chinese saying they can't get it. That set up a bunch of red flags with us. And pretty soon we were starting to see cases of this thing in the United States and starting to see it sweep and starting to see it in Dubuque. And I lost some friends to COVID. So that we're just globally terribly, terribly unprepared for anything that goes beyond the normal day-to-day operations in healthcare and elsewhere. And I hope we take that lesson seriously globally. That wasn't the answer even remotely to the question that was asked.
That's okay. No, it's been a good conversation. I think we covered a lot of ground today, and we've been trying to hold these to about 45 minutes. So want to be conscious of everybody's time, but appreciate your taking the time to speak with us today. We appreciate your service on the council, and best of luck to you.
Yeah, well, I'm grateful to what you're doing too. It's a big deal for a town this size to have 6 people of your intellect and capability to sit down with, even remotely, that represent a much larger organization. You're the only show in town now anymore that's working a newsroom and working the news. And it would be pretty easy to get lax now and say, yeah, we're the only show in town, we can do it, but we don't. You guys are digging in and doing it. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rick.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Rick.
Rick. See you later.
All right, take care.